What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Form Check Friday. Now, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is the series where we take your viewer submitted videos, we put them up on the screen, I draw all over them, and we try to help people lift better. Now, in most cases, we're looking for efficiency, as technique, I think, has a little bit less to do with injury than a lot of people might think, but more on that topic in another video. Anyways, we're going to dive right into this, and we left off last episode. What we like to do at the end of each episode is we leave a video to play, and we get comments in the comments section from our viewers to try to constructively criticize the lifters that we're working with here on Form Check Friday. Now, if you're interested in submitting your video to be featured on Form Check Friday, go ahead and send those videos to formcheckfriday@gmail.com. We do still get emails to other email addresses, and those are deleted. Send it to formcheckfriday@gmail.com and nowhere else. And yeah, we'll get to it. So we left off with our man Christian here. So Christian's doing some deadlifts. He's from Denmark, and this is 200 kilos for 4 reps, RPE 8 to 9. Been lifting for about 5 years, mostly bodybuilding in the past. Says he finds it really difficult to stay tight when getting into position. Finds it challenging to brace while getting into position and between reps. He thinks the straps might be an issue, and he finds it easier to brace properly hook grip, but it's so damn painful. He says he also feels awkward, super awkward doing conventional with a relatively stiff belt. So let's take a look and see what we can see here. Now, if I remember right, I actually really liked Christian's deadlift. I don't think there's too much that he really needs to fix or work on. And obviously 200 kilos for a set of 4 is a pretty strong deadlift. I mean, he's obviously got a pretty solid idea of what he's doing. So let's take a look. Now, this initial position to me looks great. As he begins the lift, we do see maybe a tiny little bit of things sort of going forward. So one thing that I think you could work on is just staying a little more patient off the floor, trying to keep that position that you're creating in the bottom for a little bit longer. Now, this second rep was a little bit higher hip height, and I think that allowed you to be a little bit more consistent off the floor. So maybe if we start that first rep of the set with a little bit of a higher hip height, that might help you stay a little bit more consistent. Now, to me, honestly, these look like fantastic deadlifts. So we'll notice here that his back angle doesn't really change as he initiates the lift. So you can see here, the bar's off the floor. We're at pretty much the same back angle. There might have been a little bit of shift forward, but pretty well a similar back angle. A lot of times when people start deadlifts, they start off here and they end up here, right? The hips shoot up really far behind. Now, Christian is a good example of really using his quads and getting knee extension to do a lot of work off the floor. When I coach the deadlift, a lot of times what I'll tell people to do is imagine that you're pushing the floor away. Instead of thinking about pulling back or pulling up on the bar, lock yourself in super tight against that bar and push the floor away. Christian, I think, is doing a great job of that. So honestly, Christian, I don't think you need to change much. Maybe get that first rep a little bit more consistent with the rest of the set by leaving your hips a tiny bit higher when you pull yourself into tension. But other than that, man, just honestly have some confidence. You're doing a great job. Keep practicing. All right. So that's it for our first submission here. Our second one comes from Zachary. Now, Zachary is doing some squats here. He says he's 18. This is, he weighs 75 kilos, and this is his squat PR of 122.7 kilos or 270 pounds. So let's take a look. Really deep, really loose. Couple things. All right, my man. So first off, I can't really tell what you're wearing for shoes. Now, these might be lifting shoes. They might be like a pair of Jordans or something. If they're not lifting shoes, then I would look into getting something with a really solid sole, because if these are like Jordans or something with a really cushiony sole, in a lot of cases, you're going to lose a lot of stability in that shoe. So the other thing I would say is get a little bit more comfortable with starting with a bit of a hinge. Now I'll get Dylan to link a video that we did talking about creating a hip hinge before you start your squats, and I think that's going to be really helpful and relevant in this case. So if we get a little bit of a tilt back, put some weight on the heels, push the hips back a little bit before we start the lift, I think that can get you a little bit more tight, a little bit better tensioned into your posterior chain before you initiate the squat, because I think what's happening here is we're starting with the knees. We're just sort of pushing the knees forward, trying to stay very, very upright. And you'll notice the back positions start to change right about here. We hit the bottom, and then everything kind of comes forward just a little bit. You actually do quite a good job of maintaining this torso angle. But there's a whole lot of depth and a whole lot of looseness in the bottom. So I think if we could create a tighter bottom position, we wouldn't see as much of a pronounced sticking point right there, right? Like you really, really hit the wall. Now, obviously, this is a 1 rep max PR, so top end of what you're capable of. I think we probably loosened up in the upper back a little bit. We could probably do a better job of really kind of pulling that bar into the back, keeping the elbows maybe a little bit more in line with the torso, so bringing the elbow in this way a little bit. And just really focusing on creating a very solid spot for that bar to rest and be pulled into the back, right? We want that bar to essentially just become part of the trunk so that any force we put up in this direction translates more directly into the bar. If there's any looseness in the torso, that's going to be an energy leak as we go through the squat. Overall, I think honestly a pretty decent squat, but I think there's a few things we can work on. One of them being creating a bit better hinge as we initiate the lift. The second big one is going to be creating a tighter bottom position, remaining more in control of the barbell as we reach the bottom of the squat. Now our next video comes from Hugo. Hugo's doing some bench press. Now Hugo says he's 16 years old from Australia. Shout out to all my Aussies out there. He's going to be competing on February 23rd. So coming up on a meet here. This is awesome. Currently says he's facing some issues in regard with his bench strength and was wondering if it was due to form or just a lack of strength. Generally speaking, it's usually a combination of them. For reference, he says his max deadlift is 200 kilos, max squat is 170 kilos, and his max bench is sitting around 90 kilos with a pause. He says he's running the Candido 6-week program. He said this was just some light volume to practice his leg drive. So let's take a look. Setup looks pretty good. We can see that Hugo is creating a pretty good arch here. Maybe I'll change the color of my pen there. Hugo's creating a pretty good arch there, so we can see going to be doing a good job of sort of minimizing the range of motion. So there's a couple things, right? When we go to unrack, you can see, watch Hugo's shoulders. Watch them sort of roll forward as he unracks. Now, unfortunately, these kind of racks with these big sort of hooks, you're gonna have to move that bar quite a bit to get it out of the rack. So maybe having somebody to hand off for you, or maybe unracking from the lower pins would be a good choice to avoid this. Now watch, like I said, see how much we have to roll those shoulders forward. And it actually, if we also watch, let me try to draw a nice neat line across this arch here. We watch this. So the shoulders roll forward, the arch falls as we unrack the bar. Not a great place to start. Now we get the bar out of the rack and we're still very elevated in the shoulders. I think we could do a fairly, a bit of a better job pulling the shoulder blades down into the bottom of the rib cage, as well as bring that bar out a little bit more, which will help with this, right? Because then we're getting the base, the sort of center of gravity, which is going to be the shoulder blades. If we get the shoulder blades lower, we bring this bar lower, then we have this much range of motion instead of this much range of motion. Does that make sense? Now, let's take a look at the press. So definitely like losing the chest height as we get to the bottom of the press is, it looks a lot more like it's falling than you're controlling it on the way down. Also, as we get to about this point, the elbows start to flare out. I'd like to see those stay in under the bar so that when we touch, we can press back and up. And we can see the elbows kind of come out behind the bar at this point, right? Whereas if the elbows were a little more in front of the bar in the bottom position, the bar would more naturally want to kind of come back off the chest. So we can see right about here, really good elbow position. The elbows start to flare back a little bit. And as we touch, when the elbows go back now, the bar is kind of in front of the elbows. So we're trying to fight this bar back while the bar is being tilted this way, because the center of gravity underneath it, or the sort of base of support, the forearm here is tilted in sort of the wrong direction. So it's going to make that bar tough to bring back. Now, the other thing I often see with sort of more novice bench trainees or people who struggle with their bench This guy struggled for bench for years and years and years. One of the biggest things that can help gain some weight, put a little bit more mass on your upper body. A lot of times that's a culprit. Another big thing you can do is look at increasing your bench frequency. Now, the thing about doing a sort of template program, now I know a lot of people have had a lot of success with Candido 6-week program. I fully endorse it. I think Candido is a smart coach, a smart programmer. The thing is, that program wasn't built for you. It wasn't built for your specific needs. So you want to ask yourself a few questions. Number one, Hugo, is, are you getting better at the lift? And in this case, the answer is no, right? You're feeling plateaued. The next question you want to ask yourself is, are you feeling beat up and overly fatigued? If you are, maybe you need to do a little bit less work. If you're not, maybe you need to do a little bit more work. And that can be frequency, volume, intensity, any of those metrics, but trying to increase the amount of stress that you're putting on your bench adaptation. So give that a shot. The technique, as well as, kind of asking yourself those questions when it comes to the program. I think a lot of people sometimes think that, okay, I've downloaded this program, it's going to be perfect. But I think a better way to think about it is, if you download a program, try to figure out what's working, what's not working, be critical. Don't be afraid to change things and play around with what's already been built. Obviously, you can download the Calgary Barbell 16-week program from calgarybarbell.com. Go to the coaching shop, and it is a free 16-week program. But I always recommend, if it looks like it's missing something, or it has something you really like, don't be afraid to take that aspect, put it in another program, and don't be afraid to change the program so it more specifically suits your needs. All right, we're going to look at Adam's deadlifts now. So Adam Mitchell is doing some deadlifts. He says, big fan, and recently started pulling sumo to see how things go, changing from conventional. This video is 3x3 at 145. He's only been pulling sumo. He's only been pulling sumo about 5 weeks, so still learning the hip movement and such, but so far feels this is pretty good. Any pointers would be amazing. This was after a 3x3 with conventional, 20 kilos heavier. Progressive overload program he's in seems to be working well. Just realized he's ranting on here, so here's the video, and he says Kublai Khan absolutely rip, and yes, they do. Let's take a look at this deadlift, however. So it looks to me like we're just a little bit rushed off the floor. Now, this to me looks like a pretty damn good starting position. I'd like to see a little bit more extension through that low back. A lot of times when people pull their hips into position with sumo, they tend to think about pulling them in close to the bar, which causes us to get a bunch of rounding in that low back. Now, the rounding in the low back is not necessarily dangerous, but in most cases it can be a little bit less efficient. So if we think about keeping the butt back and out behind, a lot of times it creates a little bit better pelvic positioning for the lockout. Now, the next thing we're seeing here is, as he starts to pull, we see the hips shoot up like that, right? We start to see the hips kind of creep up behind you. Now, if you push the hips back, a lot of times what's going to happen is the hips are going to be a little bit higher as well. So you're going to be tighter through the trunk, and your hips are not going to want to travel upwards because they're already going to be in a position where they're adequately loaded to get the bar off the floor, as opposed to shifting into that position and being a little bit round in the low back there. So we see the bar kind of come up, pulls you out a little bit forward. Good solid lockout. Same kind of thing there. Hips come up a little bit, things go forward. Yeah. So that's the biggest thing, is in your start position. And start position is so important in the deadlift. I think it can't be overstated. I actually like this hip height better. And then you kind of sit down more. And I think that loses tension. I think what's happening there is you're actually losing tension because you're allowing the femur to kind of come forward. And what we want to do is think about almost compressing it, right? We want to pull everything down this way without allowing this knee to travel forward. Because if we allow this knee to travel forward, it's just like force comes down this way, force goes out that way. But if we stop the knee from traveling forward and then pull down this way, what we're doing is creating tension, right? That's how we pull the slack out of the bar. Yeah. So hopefully that helps, and keep listening to Kublai Khan because it's good stuff. Next one is George, and George is doing some squats here. I feel like we've looked at some of George's lifts before. So George says, hi, my name is George. He's been lifting for about 2 years now. He said he'd appreciate critique on these two singles. This was from the start of a leg session. Plan to do 140. It's around 90%. Feels comfortable, especially good that day. So he went for 150 as well. He squats low bar. He's been playing with different grip widths. He says his stance is fairly wide, and one day he'd like to compete in a powerlifting meet. Awesome, man. Let's take a look here. All right, so this is the 140. Now, first things first, if you're going to compete, we're going to need to lock these knees better before we begin the squat. So one of the things that the judges in a powerlifting meet are looking for is that the knees are locked. We basically want to start from a locked position or start from a lockout, so that we're moving through a full range of motion. And that's one of the ways that the judges one of the metrics the judges use to critique whether or not the lift was complete. So depth looks maybe a little bit on the line, but also this camera angle from sort of back oblique is going to make things look a little bit higher as well. So it's kind of tough to say what's actually the culprit here, whether we're getting in depth. So it looks like we do a pretty good job of initiating by pushing the hips back a little bit. The feet stay relatively balanced. We get pretty close to depth, but you'll notice there's a little bit of shifting in the upper back as we do get to depth, right? That bar starts to kind of pull us forward, and then we end up having a really sort of pronounced sticking point. So I think one of the things you could probably do is pull those ribs down in front and try not to get into such an extended position, because if we watch his back position, he starts pretty extended, goes into a little bit of flexion, and then tries to extend again. And that movement through the trunk is part of what's causing that big sticking point. So really extended here into a little bit of flexion, works really hard to get back into extension. So there's just this little bit of shifting in the back. And I think if we could minimize that by not going into as much extension or going into more flexion on the descent, keeping the ribs down in front and not reaching the chest up quite so high, I think that would help with smoothing out that sticking point. All right, so our last video here, we're gonna leave this one up for our viewership to critique. So this is from Shania. She's doing some bench press, and she says she's been lifting consistently for about a year now with the help of our program. All right, so she says her numbers have improved immensely because of it. Thank you for providing such a great resource. You're very welcome. She's planning on competing in January, but is pretty intimidated about fully committing to a meet. So this is a video of pause bench, triple at 80%, which is 90 pounds for her. She says she usually has someone lift off for heavier sets, so she recognizes that her unrack is a little problematic in this video. Now, nonetheless, she says bench has been progressing pretty slowly, and she also says as expected, but she had to take a 2-week break last month due to a pulled or strained chest muscle. She said it was likely from her lack of warm-up. She's curious if there's anything else in her technique that she can improve upon for further progress. So I'm going to let this play through, and I'm going to outro this video. So everybody go ahead and leave your constructive, respectful criticism in the comments below, and I will begin next video with Shania's bench. Now, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank everybody for sitting through this video. Hopefully you've all learned something that you can apply to your own training. And yeah, we'll see everybody next week. If you're interested in this style of content, go ahead and swing by twitch.tv/Calgary Barbell for our weekly live stream every Friday at 12 p.m. MST. Like I said, twitch.tv/Calgary Barbell. We'll see everybody in the next video. Take care.